Yes, good morning. We are glad you guys are here with us for our network conversations. We are excited to have Pastor Ray Chang here. Ray Chang is the executive director for the 10 by 10 collaboration and is the president of the Asian American Christian Collaborative. He's a pastor and a writer. He's lived around the world in Korea, Guatemala, Panama, Spain, China, and traveled to nearly 50 countries. Raymond served as the Wheaton College campus minister and served as in the Peace Corps in Panama. And he's currently pursuing his PhD while he is the newly appointed CEO of 10 by 10, which is a collaborative effort to see faith matter more to 10 million teenagers in the next 10 years. And we are super excited to have Ray with us this morning. Ray, as you lead our conversation on discipling youth leaders, we are just we are ready to be a sponge. So thank you for being here and take it away.
Thanks so much. It's good to see all of you. Good to see many familiar faces. I was asked to kind of pop in and share with this wonderful group of people who are focused on discipleship and discipling the youth all throughout the country. And just from my own experience connecting with Phil and Kevin and others. Good to see you, Eric. I see you here. We're just emailing back and forth. And then, of course, those out in the East Coast, super grateful for all the good work that you're doing to really support and equip and encourage and help youth leaders navigate so many of the challenges that people are facing. And so extremely grateful for the work that everyone is doing here. I had the privilege of being out in Pittsburgh a few months ago at the gathering out there, and it was wonderful to see the energy and the enthusiasm around youth discipleship in the Pittsburgh and surrounding areas. And so very grateful for all your work. Phil, I'm guessing that I'm just going down the line with all the questions that I was given. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So they did ask a few questions, which I'll just kind of run through, and it's all around discipleship. And the first question that they asked me to kind of address was around my own discipleship journey or story. I can't say that my discipleship is complete without naming this key word, which is that it was intergenerational and it was transgenerational. And here's what I mean, that it spanned across multiple generations. I come from a family that's seventh and eighth generation Christian on either side, which is for a Korean American very rare and uncommon. I mean, I think that the most I've seen for other families is around 5 or 6 generations, and even that's fairly rare. But in my own life, there was something special about the heritage that was passed down in faith from one generation to the next. And it was a story I was told quite often when I was growing up. And it meant something to me because it showed how God was working far before I was even alive, and depositing the good faith in Jesus into me, and in about 2 weeks, my daughter, who I hope will follow Jesus with the whole of her life after she is born. And so we're about to have a baby, and so we're really grateful for that. So like the transgenerational reality is one thing, but the intergenerational reality is just observing how my parents, the people that spoke into my life, how much their care and attention towards me made a significant difference, and how there were key moments in my life as I was growing up in the church where people would speak these very insightful and even trajectory shaping truths through relationship that they had cultivated with me over the years. And even as a kid, I think that I was always able to tell this person is for me and this person is not for me. This person cares about me. This person doesn't really care about me. This person actually knows me and this person doesn't know me. And while there were elements in which I felt like Sometimes it was like a formulaic approach to things. The As I reflect back on my own discipleship journey, the thing that really stuck uh, stuck with me were the ones where the relationships were deeper. They were marked by deep care. They were marked um, by by consistently someone showing up, and of course, as I got older, always over meals. And so one of the things I shared recently at a conference, actually just last week, was how, COVID makes it very difficult for us to do just the regular things together. It's made it difficult for us to just get into a room together, to eat together, to run errands together. And I remember being like a consultation with a bunch of Latino and Asian leaders, and one of the things that we found in our to be consistent within our discipleship patterns was how it was always an invitation to do life together, and it was always a willingness to go in both directions. And so they would show up to the things that were important to me, like whether it was my concerts or sporting events or whatnot. And then they would also invite me into their home, into their family, into their kind of holiday meals, and it made a significant difference in my life. But I will say that if I'm highlighting one person, it would be a person that I met in seminary. He was one of my professors, and one of the things that he would always do beyond just every gathering being over a meal, whether it was a meal, of Chobani yogurt in his office, or it was going to a restaurant, or him bringing something like a sandwich for the both of us to eat, in between like classes, was how he invited me to participate in projects that I think shaped so much of what I do now. And he helped me think how he thinks. He helped me interact how he interacts. He helped me have dispositions in the ways that that really was people-centered and focused on something called, what he would say, deep listening, which is something he got from someone else. And I remember this one conversation we were having over a meal, and he said, if you don't take anything else away from me, the one thing I would love for you to do is to learn how to listen deeply.
Stop it. Okay. It's a webinar. It's okay.
Hey, Wes.
How did the Sunday school session end?
And then so the thing that he basically told me I need to walk away with was how to listen deeply, because when you listen deeply, you can get to the heart of a person. When you get to the heart of a person, you know what their needs are, what their concerns are, what their deepest thoughts are, what their deepest fears are, and you actually are able to see them, to meet them in their deepest needs. And that's a thing that he learned from someone else. So he's passing that in terms of a discipleship relationship, and I'm passing it on to other people. And so that's been significant in terms of my own story. And I will say, in the years that I felt like I was wandering, the thing that most impacted me when I was on the path towards rebellion against God, or on the path towards disillusionment, or what many are calling deconstruction today, for me, it was the person that had already established a relationship and knew how to balance well truth and grace. And I feel like we live in a society where the two are at odds with each other these days. And so that was my big kind of discipleship kind of journey. And I still live off of that, feed off of that. I was also asked to share some statistics on youth leader discipleship. What's been challenging is we are where we are because we have been discipled in the ways that we've been discipled. And due to a variety of factors, we are seeing how the things that are explicit or implicit, that we are conscious of and not conscious of, shape our imaginations to the ways that we do church, we do all forms of ministry, and we do relationship, and we do discipleship. And so when we look at the national data that says that 1 million, and right now the numbers are closer to 1.4 million because we're at peak disaffiliation, that 1 million people are walking away from the faith each year, which is what 10 by 10 is primary, like in significant ways driven out of. And we look at the influences of things like the church growth movement and the archetypes that everyone was kind of boxed into a particular type of profile. And it erased any of the distinctions that other people might have. And it moved us away from really celebrating the differences and the diversity within the body of Christ. And then normalized one way of doing things because numbers became more significant than lives transformed. And of course, this is not true of everyone, but this tends to be the outcome when we're celebrating big churches and big numbers all the time. We find ourselves in a situation where we focus more on programming over people, where we focus more on things like performance over people, presentations over people, and the uniqueness of people in relationships gets lost for the flashy programming that's centered around an archetypal customer. And instead, and in many ways, because of the church growth movement strategy to grow as quickly and as exponentially as possible, we found ourselves in a situation where, you know, the average youth leader was managing, like, at minimum 5 to 500 people. And one of the things that many of you will know, Chap Clark was like, we need to reverse the trend. We need to go from a 1 youth leader to 5 youth to a 5 youth leader to 1 or five youth people or 5 youth leaders, and that could be parents or adults or whatnot, to every youth. And I think if we can get to that, we'll see a reversal in the change. There is a study that was in that recently came out in Canada where like they're about 20 years ahead of us in a lot of ways. They said where without relational discipleship, 80% of the church was walking away from the faith. They said that 17% of young people would stay within the Christian faith if they had no mentor and no home church connection after graduation. And then 17% of those students would make connections with the new church. But if you had a mentor or a discipler who you had regular contact with and contact post-church graduate or to a church post-graduation, 77% ended up making a connection with a new local church and oftentimes staying affiliated with their faith. And one of the things that one of the guys at Rooted would say is that the number one thing they found in terms of making a difference in the transition between high school and college was not just the social group of people that the young person connected with, which was significant, but also whether the youth leader followed up with them after they left for college to encourage them to find a good parachurch ministry, to get connected to a church, and so on and so forth. One of the things that we found through Arbor Institute in the Dallas area, and so some of you will kind of connect with them later in the year. I think you'll meet Lisette if you go to the Movement Dallas kind of gathering, is that there are 3 things that the church was kind of described as. The first is irrelevant, where the teaching is outdated or confusing. The second is unloving, which demonstrates a lack of care for those who are different from them. And the third is inauthentic, where they felt like the church was manipulative. This is the landscape that I think is driving so much, even just outside of the Dallas area, because you hear this all the time, where youth leaders find that there are no answers to the questions that the youth is at. The youth feel like there are no answers to the questions that they're asking, and that the answers that we're giving aren't addressing the questions that are resonating or really resonating with them. And so those are just a few statistics around how what we're seeing. Obviously, one of the questions are around definitions of discipleship, and as many of you will know, there's no single definition. I think that for me, discipleship has to include several things like Jesus, like relationship, like a commitment, a willingness to impart knowledge and wisdom, or catechesis, as some traditions would say, and several other things. But I do find that the question that I was asked around what's been helpful and what's been hurtful was really helpful for me to actually reflect on. And I think that the way I would answer the question that was asked there is any definition that distracts people away from the person of Christ, a vision of the kingdom, the ethics of Christianity or Jesus, and relationship in community, and definitions that are too formulaic and too negligent of relationships tend to be the hurtful definitions. And then the definitions that help move people into Christ-centered relationships and community are the most helpful definitions. And so it's a movement towards community or a movement away from community, because one of the things that we find is that the movement of modernism has overemphasized intellectualism and just purely knowledge or information dumping over the transformative effects of what we're calling relational discipleship. And so I thought that would be most helpful. The other question I was asked is whether 10 by 10 actually has a definition on discipleship, and we don't actually have a specific definition. Phil was trying to do a getcha, because I feel like we want to leave room for kind of a broad swath of definitions that really fit within the kind of parameters that we're hoping for. Like we want people to move towards what the scriptures are calling for, a move towards each other, a move towards kind of the glory of God in all things, a move towards centering Christ. But one of the things that I've always used as my own definition is that discipleship is people walking with people to help them walk as Jesus walked, or people walking with people helping people to walk as Jesus walked. And so if we can get people to walk as Jesus walked, to think as Jesus thought, to love as Jesus loved, to move as Jesus moved, to live as Jesus lived, that's the type of discipleship that we need to see. And I think we can't get there by simply sending them a blog post, which will be helpful every now and then, or sending them to something, but ultimately being in relationship with them, because who they turn to and who they can turn to makes all the difference with where they are able to go and take the next step towards. And so I hope that was helpful in our time together. I don't know if there's any other questions that you might ask as a result of that, but I'll turn it over to you, Phil, and you or whoever I'm turning it over to and go for.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna kind of jump in here for a little bit. Thank you, Ray. That was awesome. I think some of the things that I heard throughout that, right, one of the first things you talked about in your experience was that it wasn't just them coming to your events and your things, it was them inviting you to their family stuff as well. There was that two-sided. You talked about this idea that a lot of us, we only disciple the way that we've been discipled, and we have that model. And for me, that wasn't the model I had. And that was like, man, like that's the mind-blowing thing to me, is like, when have I invited them over to my house? When have I brought them into the moments and what I'm doing? So that's huge. You talked about this idea of just relationship being the key. We're going to jump into small groups now, and we're going to let you guys wrestle through the things that you heard that kind of, hopefully you had a mind-blowing moment like I had. And we're going to ask you guys to talk through 3 questions. They're going to be in the chat as well. But the questions are, how have you seen effective discipleship of youth leaders take place? Second question will be, how have you learned from those who have discipled you? And the third question, which I think is kind of going to be where we really dive in, I hope, how do you disciple youth leaders in your community? And when we ask that question, what we just heard Ray said, keep in mind, it's not about the formula. It's not about the program being this thing that is rigid and structured, but let's swap ideas and things that we see. in our own contexts, in our own small groups as we go. So we'll jump into small group. Thank you, Ray. Again, great conversation for sure.
Feel free to pause the video here and think through these questions yourself or with the group that you're viewing this with. When you're ready, unpause to hear more of the conversation and the takeaways from the youth workers that joined us live.
I got a lot of takeaways coming back from this. And so as we gather back together in a large group setting, we just kind of want to take a little moment to share the key things that you heard in your group, because each one of our groups probably hit something a little bit different. So if you have one key takeaway, go ahead and start typing that out in the chat. We'd love to hear as many as we can and see as many of those as we can. And as you're doing that, Dan, I'm gonna call on you. Can you kind of catch up our group a little bit? We talked about this idea of intentionality at the very end there, and we got a little bit cut off. So Dan, what was your takeaway and your thought on that piece?
Well, we recognize that discipleship happens one-on-one, in the presence of other people, and the instigator for it could be, a book that you're reading, or it could just be, hey, let's go out to lunch and talk and grab a meal or whatever. But that discipleship begins with or entails intentionality, that it's not just having coffee together. It's not just being together, but there's intentionality. And that intentionality could be, I'm going to intentionally listen to this person, and because they need to talk about something, or we're kind of following where the Spirit's leading the conversation, or I'm going to intentionally ask a question about anything, but that just moves the conversation toward Jesus, rather than, hey, we hung out for an hour together and had a good time. That's friendship. But in discipleship, I just become intentional about the time that we spend together.
Mark, you talked intentionality as well in your group. Somebody that was in Mark's group that's not Mark, we'll do it that way. Talk to us a little bit about that idea of intentionality there.
Yeah, I think that's me. So yeah, we intentional listening was something that we had talked a lot about, and making the space, making the time to be able to do that. I think how we had started off with so many of our discipleship experiences were in a car with somebody, or where there was a space that you could be just a little bit more intentional. You had a little bit more focus, and could ask important questions. And so, important questions were another thing that we had said, and asking those questions, not just with in the back of your mind trying to think of how you want to answer that question, or make it all about you in a sense, but really asking questions just to hear their heart and see where they're at, and get to know them. And so I think intentional listening, intentional questions was a big bulk of what we had talked about. It's kind of an overlying theme.
Cool. All right, and then I'm gonna just go, because you're unmuted, and I'm gonna pick on you a little bit. But Jessica, what was your takeaway from that?
We had a great discussion about those of us maybe who didn't have as much of an intentional discipleship, or maybe learned through fire of what not to do. And that was a teaching tool as well. We also talked about kind of a depth and breadth of a lot of different places, not just having one mentor, but having kind of learning or discipleship from all over the place, and that the diversity of that experience can be really helpful. And then also just about the importance of how, when that was present, that is why many people are crediting, hey, I'm still in ministry now because someone poured into me and someone saw me and somebody pulled leadership out of me that otherwise I didn't see. It's really beautiful.
Cool. Awesome. Well, we're going to kind of shift gears here a little bit and go into an opportunity for you guys to kind of maybe ask some more pointed question and answer time frame. We've got Amy here with us. She's a part of 10 by 10. She's their resource manager. Amy's also spent some time as a researcher for Fuller Youth Institute, and has been a ministry leader in Christian schools for over 19 years. And so a lot of information to be gained there. She's a big part of the 10 by 10 team. If you guys, that Ray is part of as well. So if you have any questions, we're going to kind of hand off that there.
Let me give Amy a quick plug. She's going to be in the Northwest for the Northwest Ministry Conference if you guys are up here.
Awesome.
Yes. So hopefully I get to see many of you there. Yeah, I've been doing, I can relate. I feel like we're all in the same boat. Growing up in, both in youth ministry, I grew up in youth ministry and in the context of entering into youth ministry, where most of the impactful mentoring that I experienced or discipling that I experienced was informal rather than anything formal or training wise. And so I hear what you all are saying and feel it with you. And what questions do you have for me regarding 10 by 10, regarding faith formation, regarding youth ministry, context, anything?
Amy, this is Mike DeVito here. I'm interested in how can we connect our senior adults in this process? Because I know when we first started 10 by 10, it was a challenge just to try to get youth workers to go, oh, that's another thing I have to do is try to find more blah, blah, blah. So I know this is more specific, but do you have any suggestions? Because I think we're going to need to tap into that age group. And any suggestions on how to tap into the senior adults to mentor, walk alongside kids?
You know, that 100%. And that's something that so what I hear you asking two really good questions. One is connecting senior leaders, other adults into support of the youth ministry, which to me would include the youth minister, the youth leader, and then also and that's parents, senior leadership, other leaders in the church, and then also bringing other adults into the youth ministry. So would those two be what you're asking?
Yeah, I'm specifically talking about grandparents because I am a grandparent and I've really been influenced by Legacy Coalition and their intentionality. And I think there's kids in our youth group who don't have grandparents. And so I think it's an untapped source, but I think it's going to be challenging. But I just didn't know if you guys had any thoughts on how we can, besides just building relationships and those kind of things, because I think we're going to need them in order to get to where we want to be, I think.
Yes. Well, I think one of the number one things that I hear from older individuals in the church about becoming involved in youth ministry is that they're not cool enough, they're not relevant enough. And one thing that we found in a research project that there's FYI has a great book coming out this upcoming fall. One thing we found visiting churches around the country is that there are plenty of grandparent age leaders that are making very significant impact in the lives of young people. But what those youth ministries are doing is they're changing the model of what it looks to volunteer. So a lot of youth groups that I visit, the role of volunteering, it might be coming up with the games, serving the pizza, keeping the crowd control. There's not really a distribution of there's not a lot of weight-bearing roles in our traditional youth model because maybe our volunteers don't show up that frequently, or there's all sorts of reasons for that. But so we have to change the roles and responsibilities of what youth ministry looks like and what we're emphasizing. If we're saying that discipleship comes through relationship, perhaps we should do an audit of what our youth group looks like and see how much of our time with youth is actually prioritizing relationship over some of the other things, which might be informal relationship as I'm playing dodgeball next to somebody, but might not actually be the transformational relationship that we're looking for. And as we change what it looks like to know students and be, relationally discipling. There's a lot more ways for grandparents. One of my favorites is a guy who I know of multiple grandparent age adults who bought, when they needed a new car, they bought one that was either a limo or a minivan in order to be a part of taking kids places for youth ministry. And so another woman she is a white woman in a mostly non-white youth group context, had kids over for tea. And again, you got to get parent permission and you got to make sure it's more than one kid or all those reasons. But she would have them over for tea, like old school grandma style tea. And I got to hear students talk about how important that was and her talk about how important that was. So let's just get more creative about how the grandparents can mentor.
Thanks, Amy.
Awesome.
That's great.
And forgive me, I'm looking at our time. This is a conversation I would love to continue on. And after we close down, we will be able to still have some time for sharing. We stick around afterwards, kind of the post-game meeting. So if you want to do that, that's great. Before we leave, I want to be able to pray for us and share one announcement. Our next network conversations is on every community. And it's the idea of how to reach teenagers across all the different communities. So towns and cities, rural, the whole shot, but also within our community, the different cultures that are there, we need to be able to reach teenagers within those as well. And so we're going to have Seth Stevens, who's Tribal Ministries Coordinator for us and for On Eagle's Wings Learning Center. He is a Navajo, and he works with many First Nations. He's probably dealt with more cultures than I could even count on my fingers. So with that, that'll be our next time together. That'll be March 14th at 9 a.m. Pacific. We'll send you a follow-up along those lines with a little eval for it, and then as well, other resources, and we'll have the video from today available for us as well, so that you can look at that, learn from that. So that's kind of what we've got. Thank you for your time, for the amazing questions, for the idea of discipling leaders is so valuable and important for all of us. So let me pray for us, and then we'll head off. Thank you, Jesus, for these amazing people who love you and just want to learn from one another about how to disciple youth leaders. Thank you for Ray and for Amy, for their time, for their hearts to help better equip us. And as we network youth leaders, help us, God, to first put our hearts in you and abide, and then see who we need to disciple, and then who we need to then help to disciple others. So we love you, God. We thank you, and we put you always first. Amen.
Thanks for viewing this network conversation, brought to you by the National Network of Youth Ministries. We hope it helps you to set the table for unity and further conversations with other youth leaders. Any shared links are in the comment section on NNYM's YouTube channel. While you're there, feel free to like and subscribe. If you want to join our next conversation or training, you can find upcoming live events on our Eventbrite page. You can also connect to a local network leader at nnym.org. We're here because we are better together. Hello again, we're back here with Amy Carnell, one of the resource managers for 10 by 10, and this is just a little extra to our network conversations. We want to ask her the question, if I'm a youth leader who wants to change my youth ministry, where do I start and how does 10 by 10 help? Amy?
That felt as an excellent question, and thank you for having me in on this conversation. And I think that the first thing I want to do with that question is shift our thought as youth leaders away from youth ministry as a program and thinking about youth ministry as relationships. So how do we change our youth ministry in a way that helps our students build, our youth build relationships or grow in relationships with Jesus. And the way that we do that is to shift our focus in youth ministry to relationships themselves. So when I'm thinking about changing my youth ministry, I'm going to try it with as hard as I can to not think about what I'm teaching or what games I'm playing or how my time is structured, and shift away to what actually will help me change my youth ministry is looking at the people in my youth ministry and how they're doing in the process of learning of knowing and following Jesus. And when I say the people in my youth ministry, the first person I think that we should think about is ourselves. So how can I change my youth ministry? I encourage youth leaders to start thinking about, how are you doing? How is your personal life going? How healthy are you? Are you on the brink of burnout? Are you thinking more with frustration when you think about your youth ministry, or are you thinking more of excitement and flourishing? If there's something that's not quite jiving or right there personally or spiritually, are you encouraging your students to spend time reading their Bibles and praying, and yet you're scrambling so much during your week that you're opening your Bible only really to prepare to teach, right? And I'm saying that from being a youth leader. I've been there, right? So how do I change something in my youth ministry? I first start and look at how I'm doing as a leader. I shift away from what my youth ministry looks like and look at what the people look like and how they're doing, starting with me. I take a bit of an evaluation or an assessment there. And then I start looking for resources of how can I grow. And also then, what are the other relationships or people in the room that matter? Our adults around us matter. So I start looking and taking inventory about, like, hey, who else is investing in my youth? Who can get into a relationship with youth and show them how to follow Jesus? And how do I shift what I'm doing on a weekly basis in my youth group to help get those people in the room connected with my youth in a meaningful way? And when I say meaningful, I mean a way that's good for them and a way that's good for my students and helping my students follow Jesus, right? And so I start equipping volunteers. And then we together, the adults in the room, start looking at and praying about, God, what do you want to do in our youth ministry, and helping our students develop an understanding of who they are, their identity based in who Jesus Christ is. And it all then starts to shift from there. But it has to start with the people first and then move into the things that we do, the relationships that we build with students. So the second part of your question was, what does 10 by 10 have to do with that? What we're working on at 10 by 10 is we're working on creating a way of a youth leader to show up and to say, hey, I want to know how I can change my youth ministry. Help. And we're working on creating a network that connects youth ministry leaders to other leaders, to peers, other leaders who are in my area, other leaders who lead in churches like mine, locally or nationally, and then also to provide really simple plans or steps to take to move toward change. And why I say simple is because if you're a youth minister like me, you don't have a lot of capacity for reading long books, making notes about it, and making plans to change, right? We need it to be something that we can just simply say, oh, this is a great idea. Let me try it in my youth ministry next.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Amy, thank you so much. And thank you to 10 by 10 for all the listening that they have been doing, all the collaborating that they've been bringing together. to create what I'm sure is going to be an awesome movement in this country, and helping youth leaders to be the leaders that are leading students so that they can be leaders in their communities and their families. So
that's right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And so I can say that a place to start is head to 10 by 10, 10x10. So the number 10, TENX 1010.org, and browse around. There's already some ideas up there that I think would be helpful for you for getting started.